And I found myself humming through the Women's Baseball League theme song for quite a while afterwards. If anyone knows it, we are the members of the All-American League. We come from cities near and far. Anyways, if you know League of Their Own, you'll probably continue singing that in your head.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corrine from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
As the great Scottish poet Robbie Burns said, in Corrine's best Scottish accent, the best laid plans of mice and men oft gagliole. At least that's what I usually heard when someone kind of like quoted it to me. And I just looked it up online, and it's actually the best laid plans of mice and men oft go awry. Yeah, so we're looking back at past mistakes, past regrets, the years gone past. We're going old lang syne, and we are back at 2024. Cast your mind back to all the events that happened, or maybe don't. Or maybe just live in the moment. So my fellow book friends of Keep It Fictional, today we are looking back at the year 2024 and reading a book that we had meant to read last year, but for reasons, fate, intervention, library distribution, we simply didn't. So today I am joined by my book friends Emma, Virginia, and Sadie. And we have all chosen a 2024 book that we just didn't get our hands on, whether it just sat languishing on our to-be-read shelf, or our hold didn't come in, or there were newer, shinier books to read, but we still wanted to highlight this 2024 gem. So, Sadie, what is the book that you just didn't get to, the one that got away, if you will?
All right. So the book that I picked for this week was one that I knew I would be reading at some point. It has been on my list for a while. I really like the author. I've read a lot of other things that the author has written, and I've really enjoyed everything. I even read another book by this author last year, but for some reason, as our theme states, I just didn't get around to this one. I got the book for Christmas, though, so that made it a lot easier to read for this episode. And this is The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. Now, our story begins on Thanksgiving in 1954 in Washington, D.C., at the Briarwood boarding house. And there has been a murder, a gruesome murder. The victim was slashed across the throat, leaving a spray of blood across the green walls and painted vines and flowers of the room on the fourth floor. Many of the 17 witnesses, most of whom are women, are also covered in blood, and most are, maybe unsurprisingly, in hysterics. The police have arrived and are currently talking to the house's owner, a Mrs. Nilsson. Now, Mrs. Nilsson had not been there. She had been out at a bridge tournament all day and night. Her 17-year-old son, Pete, is hovering behind her. Briarwood House has never liked Mrs. Nilsson, ever since she first moved in 20 years earlier. From day one, she had been complaining, and the house was honestly quite sick of it. Who lives in the fourth floor apartment? The police are asking Mrs. Nilsson. That would be Mrs. Grace March, she replies. Briarwood House and Pete Nilsson first saw Grace March in June of 1950. Confident and sophisticated, Pete was smitten almost immediately. He'd noticed that happening more often since he turned 13. Pete was out fixing the old screen door when Grace walked up and asked in her Iowa accent if the boarding house had any rooms available. Pete's mom had just painted the fourth floor room, more of a closet really, a bright green, and had added a small icebox with a hot plate so that she could advertise it as a room with a kitchenette. Pete couldn't imagine anyone as glamorous as Grace, or anyone at all, would want to live in such a shoebox. However, only a couple minutes after Mrs. Nilsson took her upstairs to see the room, she ran back down to tell Pete that Grace would take it. and had paid for 6 months' rent up front. Pete didn't know why exactly, but after Grace moved in, the atmosphere at Briarwood House started to change, and Pete with it. Ever since his dad had left them and moved to New Jersey, Pete and his little sister Lena had been doing the best they could. But Mrs. Nelson was demanding and often cruel and really only cared about money. Pete spent more time working around the boarding house and helping Lena with her reading than attending school or seeing friends. And Mrs. Nelson had the plans to take Pete out of school entirely after the year was through. Lena struggled so much due to needing reading glasses that Mrs. Nelson refused to pay for and would usually just end up annoying everyone around her. But then there was Grace. Grace, who offered Pete a glass of delicious sun tea that she had made in her window as soon as she moved in, who somehow had the patience to deal with Lena, and who, after talking to him for only a few minutes, got Pete to open up about his father leaving and the letters that he continues to write with no response, about how what Pete misses most are the nights when he and his father would gather in the kitchen and make the most delicious Swedish meatballs. You may even say that it was those meatballs that started everything. One Thursday night, when Pete's mom was out at bridge, Grace invited Pete up to her 4th-floor room, where she was spending time with Joe Reese, a jazz musician who lived next door. She offered him the hot plate and a batch of ingredients and told him that her and Joe would do whatever he asked to make his father's meatballs. Before long, most of the other boarders had arrived too. Nora, who was Pete's original crush, a young woman of just 20 years old, still with a slight Irish lilt in her voice. Fliss, kind and soft-tempered, with her proper British accent, and her baby daughter Angela. Claire, red-headed and brash. Arlene, with her strong Texas drawl and dreams of becoming the ideal wife one day, and her constant diets. Rika, the oldest in her 60s, hardly ever saying anything that was not in Hungarian. And Bea, an ex-women's baseball league player who is currently teaching phys ed at a middle school. And of course, 8-year-old Lena, who insisted on baking the most disgusting cookies that anyone had ever tasted. They all gathered in Grace's small room to eat Swedish meatballs. This was the first time. But these Thursday night meetings would continue on for the next 4.5 years, each boarder taking turns to cook, welcoming boyfriends and girlfriends and friends as their lives went on. Grace and her Thursday night dinners were what brought the boarders of Briarwood House together, dubbing themselves the Briar Club. They would all find themselves there on that Thanksgiving night in 1954, most of them covered in blood, some of them, maybe, responsible for the violence that took place. However, in June of 1950, none of this was known. None of them could ever have imagined that this would be how their lives would turn out. None, maybe, except for Grace. I find this book a little difficult to talk about because the story unfolds slowly through each of the boarders' different perspectives. In order to get a good idea of who the characters are and where everyone comes into the story and how they all relate back to the murder, it would take hours and I would end up giving away way more of this book than I had intended. However, there are some key plot points and character connections that I think are important to kind of take note of. So the story takes place in the middle of McCarthy-era U.S., where fear of a Soviet communist invasion was something on most people's minds, the Red Scare. The idea of communist spies hiding in plain sight was being drilled into people, and there was constant distrust and betrayal between neighbors, colleagues, friends, and even families. Each of our female protagonists gets their own section of the story to tell, with each one moving the bigger timeline further along closer to the murder. In each person's section, we learn not only more about their background and what brought them to Briarwood House, but also about their current lives and the struggles they're going through. For example, we have Nora, who is part of a police family back generations, including currently her brother. She has a strong sense of what is right and what is wrong. For example, her police officer brother taking her paychecks to pay his rent after he has gambled away all of his own money, she's pretty sure is wrong, even if her brother and her mother tell her that it is her duty. This is just one of the reasons why Nora has tried to cut all ties with her family. However, when Nora gets involved and falls in love with Xavier Byrne, a member of the warring crime family, her sense of right and wrong is thrown into chaos. And when Xavier hurts someone as retribution for pain caused to Nora herself, she's not sure what she believes anymore. As the book goes on, the boarders of Briarwood House come together even more and start to rely on each other, and maybe even consider each other friends, all thanks to Grace March. Their stories are intertwined to continue on with our bigger timeline, and each of the boarders has their own secret. Now, Grace is always able to draw things out of these other women, knowing or getting them to reveal secrets about their lives that they vowed never to share with anyone. However, for all her warmth and support and a shoulder to cry on, Grace reveals very little about her own life. She claims that she is a widow, but no one knows much else. As we get closer to Thanksgiving 1954, we start to learn more about Grace, and the reader starts to wonder how exactly she is connected to the murder. Between each character's section, the story is interjected with scenes from the night of the murder, with the narrator weirdly enough being the house itself. I'm not quite sure how I felt about that. A semi-sentient house narrating as they are seen. The police continues to cast suspicion onto different members of the Briar Club and those who are connected to them. We don't actually know who the murder victim is until right at the very end, adding another layer of surprise. To be completely honest, I was not sure about this book when I first started it. I think that it does a good job of drawing you in right off the bat by starting it very, very bluntly with a murder. But then I found myself losing a little bit of interest in the first section, which focuses on Pete's story. So 13-year-old Pete, he's the only male character that gets his own section in this book. Now, as I read through and was kind of brought more into the story and the connections between the Briar Club women, I definitely warmed up to it. The 1950s are not a time period that I've read a lot about. I usually prefer my historical fiction to be a bit more historical. However, it was an interesting time period to read about, not a time that I know a lot about. For anyone who liked A League of Their Own, either the original movie or the reboot, original movie was a very, very big favorite of mine when I was growing up. You will appreciate B's section. And I found myself humming through the Women's Baseball League theme song for quite a while afterwards. If anyone knows it, we are the members of the All-American League. We come from cities near and far. Anyways, if you know League of Their Own, you'll probably continue singing that in your head. So that was a fun little connection there that I enjoyed. I think that by not revealing the murder victim right away, it adds an additional guessing game. And I think that Kate Quinn does a good job of putting in clues as well as plenty of red herrings to keep the reader guessing and wondering who is going to wind up dead at the end of the book. I know that a lot of her more recent books have focused quite strongly around World War I and World War II. Even though they take place kind of in the 50s, they'll often be looking back at those time periods. This is one of the first ones that I've read recently of hers that doesn't do that. So there's not a huge, strong connection to World War II or World War I. One of the characters does have one, but that's not kind of the main connection in the main story. So it was a bit of a different kind of direction that Kate Quinn went in. And yeah, I would say that I enjoyed the book. I was definitely drawn in as the story went on. If you enjoyed other Kate Quinn books, or if you like kind of a historical fiction with a bit of a mystery, definitely a focus on kind of strong female connections, things like that, then I think that The Briar Club by Kate Quinn would be a good pick for you.
Nice. That one was also definitely on my to-be-read list.
I read The Phoenix Crown, which was Kate Quinn and Janie Chang, and that one was really good, but which was also, I think, published last year, but I didn't quite get to this one.
And that's what this episode is all about. Okay, well, the book that I chose is actually one that I think I couldn't exactly figure out the terminology of this, like our former book friend, but that sounds like we broke up with them, like ex-book friend also doesn't sound very good. A previous book friend on the podcast, Fiona, I believe, had talked about, which was the Banned Book Club a YA graphic novel. And if Fiona didn't talk about it on the podcast, then they definitely talked about it to me. And that is kind of how I read about it. Which is written by a wife and husband duo. It's a semi-autobiographical kind of coming of age YA graphic novel that kind of came about when Ryan Estrada, who is the husband, was kind of having a casual conversation with his wife, Hyun Sook, and she's like, "Oh yeah, did I mention that like I was in a subversive underground band book club when I was in college? Oh yeah, like a couple of members got arrested, questioned by the police a couple of times, no big deal." And he was like, "I'm sorry, this conversation. What are you? What?" And kind of out of her own personal history came the book and Book Club, which was illustrated by Ko Hyung-ju. And this is the sequel to that. And this one is just done by the wife and husband duo. And it is called No Rules Tonight. Kind of a follow-up to the Banned Book Club. So if you haven't read Banned Book Club, do not despair. The book starts with no prior knowledge required other than the time period that we're in. The story starts in 1984 in South Korea, and it is under the authoritarian regime of the Fifth Republic. There is a very, very strict curfew that everyone must adhere to or else be taken in by the police. But there are two exceptions to the curfew. One of them is Chuseok, which is a Korean holiday, and the other is Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, you can stay out and party as long as you like. And so for Hyun and the rest of the members of the Cultural Dance Committee, this is a chance to kind of let loose, go wild, and really find and explore things that aren't possible on other nights. Now, each of the members of the Cultural Dance Committee is dealing with their own secret or struggling with their own question. In the previous book, our heroine, Hyun, is part of the Banned Book Club. Now, in the midst of Molotov cocktails being thrown in the streets, students disappearing and reappearing at college bruised or beaten, thinking and reading the wrong thing can be dangerous. However, she is drawn into her love of books and her love of stories and her desire to protest against the injustices of the government to join a secret underground banned book club. However, this is a new year and the leader of the club is going to be switching schools. And so she needs to decide whether she wants to take up the mantle and continue this banned book club, despite the dangers that it might lead to for her family, and for her fellow readers. As she's struggling with this, the group has decided to go to a full weekend expedition to the mountains. The entire club is going to climb up a mountain in the middle of December and have a good time. I guess that sounds appealing to some university students, perhaps. And they are going to do this on Christmas Eve. So all of this like energy is gathering around this meeting. Other members of the group, Taehee and Kiwoo, are thinking that this might be finally the chance to kind of like confess their crushes to each other. Jin and Ji are members of the cultural dance group, but also members of the military, and they're a bit apprehensive about their future. What does it mean to be part of a military where military people are killing protesters just like them? There's Suji, a lovely young lesbian who wants to confess her crush to the old leader of the group so bad. And there's Malja, who's really wanting to explore their gender. And this might be the chance to kind of confess and share what they really feel inside. However, before the group is about to start off on their expedition to the mountain, Hyun, their leader, is arrested. In the middle of the day, the national anthem is played and everyone must stop where they are. Cars must come to a halt. People in the street must stop walking. Unfortunately, at the time, he is listening to his Walkman and doesn't realize that the anthem is playing. When the police crash into him, they listen to what he is listening to and realize that it is a folk song. Unfortunately for him, it is a folk song that is often played at protests. They immediately arrest him, take him away, and put him in jail, and his fate is unknown. However, the rest of the group decides to embark on the trip nonetheless. However, they do so under the shadow of what happened to their leader. This book is a really interesting mix of normal, typical coming of age, university student, like romance and secrets and crushing and what's going to happen about the future. But under this really interesting lens of life is like for kind of youth under a totalitarian regime. What I think is really interesting about this book in particular of how it does that is that the illustrations done by the wife and husband group are quite, I would say, cartoonish. The illustrations themselves look really young. So it's a different person than did the first book, that the banned book club. And so it almost feels like a Nickelodeon cartoon. The eyes are really big. The illustrations are really sweet and exaggerated, which kind of lulls you into the sense that this is more of like a softer story. And then every once in a while, you're kind of hit with the violence of what is happening and the reality that they're kind of struggling with. And so it kind of creates this really interesting dichotomy when you're reading it, in that the look of it is so sweet and childish, and then the actual narrative itself is quite oppressive and difficult to kind of grasp. So it was a really interesting change from the first book, which was done by Kyo Hong-ju, that this one just is a bit of a lighter story. But again, the story starts with the leader being arrested and tortured by the police, done in this really light, childish style. So it really does force you to grapple with the layers of what's going on. This is a very sweet story, a very young story, a very kind of gentle coming of age. But again, what's going on underneath is that all these students are protesting. They're finding their own way to express themselves and wondering about the future, being under essentially a dictatorship and the uncertainty around this. What I think was really interesting about this is that it also illustrates the distrust that is created under a totalitarian regime. Into this kind of group, there is a new guy that comes along, and he's handsome and he plays the guitar and he's singing songs. However, Hyun isn't really sure about him because there is the very real possibility that he could be a government spy. He could be a government spy that they have sent to accompany them on their winter vacation. And so it's really hard for anyone to trust or share or really have these hearts to heart because you don't really know what anyone's motivations are. And even though they're joined together on this mountain, relying on each other for kind of like survival because some people don't know how to pack anything but potatoes, they really, in many ways, cannot open their hearts to each other because of the distrust fostered by the regime itself. And so it's really brave and kind of wonderful, again, adding that other layer when people are really honest with themselves and their secrets that could get them into a lot of trouble. What is another layer on top of this is that in the book, it is talked about how the fifth regime had banned the book Brown Bear, What Do You See? By Bill Martin Jr., which is a very sweet story asking Brown Bear, what do you see? I see a red bird looking at me. Red bird, what do you see? I see a blue horse looking at me, which again, you wouldn't think is like an extremely subversive story. And in fact, in the conversation that she has, she's like, is the red bird communism? And the person is like, no, it's just a red bird. But the reason why it was banned is because the fifth regime had mistaken Bill Martin Jr., the very sweet author, with Bill Martin and hadn't bothered to do their research to distinguish between the two of them. But what is actually the most chilling thing is in the author's note in the back is that the Texas School Board in 2023 made exactly the same mistake. And so I think the author does a really good job of pulling these parallels between regimes, between kind of the ideology behind book banning, the idea of why you don't want books in certain hands of other people. And in fact, what the author says again in the back is that her own book, Banned Books, has been banned in several libraries in the United States. And so we see that cycle over and over again. And, you know, what is heartening is that there are readers and writers like those who have done No Rules Tonight and Banned Book Club that are always going to be there to protest and to ensure that books can be read, that books are free, and that readers are free to explore and think for themselves. So, if you're looking for a very kind of like sweet graphic novel, I think that this one would be really good for kind of like a tween audience as well, like kind of like your 12 to 15, especially grasping and struggling with what is happening right now or things that they might be seeing to kind of get some of that historical context. As an adult reader, it definitely made me interested. It made me want to read all the books in the banned book clubs. One of them is The Art of Loving by Eric. My German is as good as my Scottish accent. And so, yeah, I'm really glad that I got to it. I'm really happy that I kind of went back to this 2024 release. And I'm excited to kind of see what they do next. Again, I would love a memoir. Just saying, like a full written memoir would be nice. All right. So, since we are taking a look back, we're not looking back in anger as Oasis would caution us to do. We're looking back with fresh, forgiving eyes. And I'm curious to know, my book friends, what are your reading regrets of 2024?
I'm definitely looking back in anger. I think I regret is that I prioritize sleep over reading. What was I thinking? Yeah, there's certain days that it's just like my body is just like, no, you gotta sleep. And I'm like, no, I really should be reading. So yeah, so that is my regret.
I'm going to disagree with you on that, Virginia. I really think you should be prioritizing sleep. My reading regret, I think, is I only started doing the podcast at the end of 2023. So by the end of the year, when we had to come up with our best books of the year, I was like, I read like 2 books that were published in 2023 and only one that I enjoyed. And so last year, I really tried to go out of my way to read a ton of books that were published in 2024. But the problem with that is I read so many duds. I feel like rather than prioritizing reading things that I was genuinely interested in, I was like, well, that's 2024, so I have to read it. And that one's 2024, so I have to read it. And so I read a lot of things that I just didn't like. And this year, at this point, I don't think I've read anything 2025 released yet, but I've been really enjoying everything that I've been reading so far. So you know what? I think I'm doing fine for myself.
I don't think it's the year's fault, though. There are lots of great 2024, 2025, 2023, whatever year it is, books.
It's true. Maybe I'm just reading the bad ones. But yeah, trying to prioritize, just focus on the stuff that you like rather than what the publication year is.
I was going to say something similar. I kind of regret not reading more books that I really was really interested in. And I hesitate to say that, though, because I didn't find a lot of books that I was really interested in. So I don't know if it was more me just not reading the ones I was or just not finding them. But this year, definitely, I'm going to be, same as Emma, focusing more on the ones that I'm getting excited about. I'm going to make a point of actually reading them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Sometimes you kind of get caught up in the very gentle grind of the podcast of oh, snap, I've got to read a book about snakes. I'm really stuck with that snake one, guys. And that you kind of forget, oh yeah, I've also got to read books that I'm just interested in and kind of find the balance of the time. Yeah. So I think my regret is that is kind of that, and that I didn't spend enough time on my niche nerdy pursuits of art history, theft, and not enough interlibrary loans. And so I've really, this year I've committed myself to my very niche interests, and I'll just read some shorter books for the podcast. All right. Well, we're all full of regrets in life, but Virginia, what is your lingering regret from 2024 vis-a-vis reading or the book that got away?
The book that I read for today got on my radar because it won a couple prizes last year. First is the Novel Prize, which is given out by 3 independent publishers. My favorite, New Directions in the US, Fiscarado Editions in the UK, and Giramondo in Australia. So they pick a book that they are all going to simultaneously publish. So that's the winner of co-winner actually in a couple years ago. And it came out last year. And it also then later in the year won the Ursula Le Guin Prize, which is a prize given to, as the website describe it, an imaginative fiction to recognize writers that are realists of a larger reality who can imagine real grounds for hope and see alternatives to how we live now. So this is the winner of that. And so I kind of felt like I should be reading this, and I've been waiting for it. And we finally got our copies at the library last week, which was kind of perfect timing. And so even though I had a whole bunch of books that are lined up for it, this many 2024 books that I didn't get to, but this one sort of went to the top of my pile. And having read the first 20 pages, I'm like, I'm just going to go buy this book because I need to own it. So it's that kind of book. The book is called It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne De Marchen. And I thought a lot about how much to review about the book and how to talk about it, because I think when I say that, oh, the narrator is this type of person, I run the risk of two likely response. Either a reader will say, well, I don't read books about X, or that I will have well, I read many of them. I've seen it all. There's nothing new. So first of all, of course, there's always going to be something new. Someone out there is always going to have a fresh point of view, a fresh perspective, a fresh way of describing something. So I can assure you this is a new take. I also think that I'm more and more aware of that genre labels are very limiting in many ways sometimes. And things, certain subjects often get immediately associated with a genre, and that will, in myself also, will elicit like either an automatic kind of like positive or negative response. And they're very limiting. They really don't describe what the book is, and they're very often insufficient in kind of talking about how stories are told, especially in stories like that are from around the world, because they don't have the same kind of artificial label. So I'm really, really aware of it. And so I'm very worried, and I feel kind of sad that many people is going to miss this book when I say that it is about zombies. It is about the undead. It is a zombie novel, but it is so not a zombie novel. Our narrator finds herself among the undead and being one of them. Why and how she's transformed and how she ended up this way, we don't know. And it doesn't matter because, again, this is not that kind of zombie novel. They all live in a hotel. It's nice, it's clean, it's organized. Everybody has their own room. And just because we often think of zombies a certain way, I'm going to say they are very, very civilized. They mostly just get together and they talk. Most of them have some memories of what their lives were like before, when they were so-called alive, even though, again, they are very, very much alive, even though they are dead, supposedly. And when they get together, they just kind of talk. They often list things, like a list of jobs that they have done or a list of places they have been to. And sometimes they tell each other about their memories, about the story, something that they remember. And everyone has like a particular memory that they remember better. Even though you might have heard that story before, everyone makes appropriate noises. They ask probing questions because it's really important to all of them that they get listened to. Things sometimes get mixed up after hearing so many stories. And because your memory is also a little hazy, you're kind of like, wait, am I the one who has like that green toy truck that I carry around in my pocket as a kid that I like to like drive around, and that like I would run it across the fence, I would run it on top of the railing, when I go down the stairs? Was it me or was it someone else? Sometimes it gets a little confusing. But there's one thing that none of them can remember. That's their name. None of them know their name, so they get to pick a new one. Which begs the question, as our narrator asks, if you can pick any name in the world, why would you pick Bob? Why would you be Bob? That makes no sense. Anyway, so there's a wall of names that they get to choose from. But our narrator doesn't want to go near the wall because she's afraid. She's afraid that if she sees your name, she may not recognize it, that is your name. Most of her memories involve you. Things that she'd done together with you, things that you have said, things that she imagined you say now to her. Like right now, she just lost her left arm. She lost it today, and Janice number 2 has to bring it back to the hotel to her. She doesn't really know what to do with it. She doesn't want to like just throw it away. So she keeps it. She sleeps with it sometimes. She pretends it's your arm that she's lying next to. She thinks about what you would say to her if you see her now. You'll probably say, oh, that's okay. You're still you. The most vivid memory that she has, the ones that keep coming back to her, is you and her lying in the sand. She can hear the sound of the waves. She can smell the ocean. She can see you squinting in the sunlight. And that absolute perfect comfort of silence, of lying just next to you in the sand. And that's something that keeps coming back to her. And so when something happens, an incident happens at the hotel to someone that she likes to talk to quite a bit, and that they used to say to each other, oh, this is not real. And then the other will answer, well, some of it is real. Our narrator decides that it is perhaps time to go find the ocean. So with her severed arm, with a dead crow that she binds to her chest that talks to her sometimes in single words, she set out on a journey into the unknown and perhaps the unrecognizable world outside the hotel. Yes, this book features the undead, but it is very, very much about life, using the point of view of someone who is no longer technically alive, as they explore, as they observe, as they experience and contemplate this new world, this new reality that they find themselves in. We learn about what being alive means, what matters, what's important, and how sometimes we only truly see what it is when we have lost something, and what makes us, and how much do we lose until we are no longer us. Like this arm, for instance, like, is there some essence of her that is in the arm that, that's why she's kind of afraid to throw it away? Or does that, once it's detached from you, that essence come back to you somehow? She doesn't really know. She remembers when she was a kid, she wanted to be a horse. So she would like tie like tree trunks, like little branches to her arm so that she can have like, this is her front legs, and she will like gallop around. And for her, those two branches, the extension of that's what makes her feel like she is a horse. So if she lose her arm, like, does it mean should I not be feeling like I'm a human anymore? Like, what is it that makes us us? This is also a novel about memories, about the nature of memories, how they deteriorate, how they get reinforced. And what we remember is often what actually happened, but over time, because we keep adding to it, we keep forgetting things, that becomes part of us, that becomes that reality. It's also, of course, a book about grief, about the fear that we all have of losing things, about the things that we've lost. We speak about regrets just now, the things that we regret. It's also about being kind of in between. Like, she's not dead, but she's not alive. And being here, like, she doesn't know what she calls herself now, but it's in this space that she can kind of look backward, but also look forward at the same time. And in the book, near the end, there's this really quite interesting imagery of how that comes about, like just, being able to look backward and forward at the same time. And just being in this space and kind of wondering, is it the end or is it the beginning? It's really hard to tell sometimes, like whether it is something just ending or whether it's just something starting. I read an interview with the author, Anne De Marchen, and she talks about narratives about monsters, right? Like our obsessions with it, and how it's often reflections of ourselves, and how we create this monster of all the things that are scary to us, that we don't understand, that are unfamiliar, that are different, and we feel threatened by it. So we make it a monster, and we become those heroes that fight it, like, and we talk a lot about this also on our podcast before, this idea of like how we demonize certain things because we don't understand it and we make it into a monster. But she said that like zombies has never like interested her. And so she wanted to understand, well, why not zombies? Like, what is it that I am not willing to look at about myself? And what is it? And she called a zombie a ravenous cannibal. And she's like, what is, so she started thinking about, well, zombies, everybody think about them. They're like, they're hungry. They're always hungry, even though they're not eating to sustain themselves. Like, can they even digest the food? Who knows? But like, it's this hunger. But why this hunger? And she started reading about a thing that Anne Carson said. And she said, well, why does tragedy exist? Because you're full of rage. And why are you full of rage? Because you're full of grief. And she started thinking about this idea of hunger and rage and grief and zombies. And that's how it led her write this book about how we are made up of all these things that we are scared to lose, and what happens to us when we lose them, and how much, she said, how much can we lose before we ourselves are lost? And then what happens after that? It's a heartbreaking book. There are definitely some like kind of dry humor, funny bits in the beginning, especially when you start to realize, wait, they're zombies. And, because they act so much like humans, we're just like, wait. And then so there's like little bits in here that are kind of like funny, but it is such a heartbreaking book. And it's got like these like just really addictive language. I find, like I said, I read about 20 pages. I'm like, I know I need to buy this book because, you just get hooked with it. And it's got everything I want about a book, zombies or not. So, I think I really hope that you won't let the zombies get in the way and that you will really be willing to, because it is just a beautiful, beautiful book. It really reminds me of a lot of books that we talk about on the show that is about sort of that relationship and about like, identity and humans and all that. So yeah, so if that interests you, I would highly, highly recommend you to pick this up. It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne De Marchen.
Nice. It's always nice to see like an author take on such a, like, zombies I would think were like done. Like they've been done to death. So it's always interesting to see an author take like a fresh take on it. All right, Emma, the one that got away.
Alrighty, I feel like it'll be hard to follow that like existential zombie book. Also, the fact that your book, Virginia, had a crow on the cover makes me want to read it. I feel like I'm leaning into crow vibe this year, so I'll have to add that one to my list. So my book that got away last year, this is one where we actually also, like Corinne, did a young adult graphic novel. And this is one that we don't have here at the Port Moody Library. So I had it on hold back when it was on order at the Vancouver Public Library. But it was one of those holds that like, I'm really bad at keeping track of my VPL holds. And it's one of those holds that came in like on a day that I was leaving town to go on vacation for a week. So I was like, well, darn, I have to like cancel this hold, reset it, and then wait through the cycle again for the next turn. And then that hold came in when I was leaving town again. And so like I was just kind of caught in this VPL hold cycle, and I don't want to have to pay for my holds that I forget to pick up at VPL. So I ended up actually just purchasing this book because I was so drawn into like the title of it. The concept of it was very much up my alley. And so I ended up buying this one. Before I share what this is, I have to give a little backstory. So I don't know if book friends present here know this about me. This is a little bit embarrassing, but when I was growing up, when I was like a preteen teenager, I was a youth group kid. So my family, I did not grow up in a religious household. My family only started attending church when I was in grade 8. My parents decided that they were going to send my younger siblings to a private school that was attached to a church. And so they were like, okay, let's start going to this Lutheran church. Let's get a little bit involved. And we were like, teenagers who didn't want to like try something new, didn't want to start going to church for the first time. But a good friend of mine who grew up on my block was a part of the youth group at this church. And she was like, hey, you should check out this youth group. It's super fun. The people are awesome. You have to come. And I was like, okay, for you, I will give it a shot. So my sister and I attended this youth group. My sister immediately did not like it. She didn't want to keep going. But I actually really liked the people and the friends that I made there. So I stuck with it through grade 12. And despite like enjoying it, continuing to attend the youth group, I never really connected with like the religious aspect, with the faith aspect. Whenever we would pray as a group, I would like fake it and pretend that I was like listening to God and feeling a connection to him. But it just like that part wasn't something that ever really connected with me. But I did really enjoy like the friends that I made, the relationships that I was able to build there. The youth leader was actually a pretty chill person. So like I enjoyed connecting with him, and it provided me with some kind of cool like leadership, volunteer opportunities that I could do as a teenager. So like all in all, it was not a negative experience. When I went away to university, I never sought out a church again. It just like wasn't something that I felt really drawn to or felt like I needed to continue with in my life. So my youth group days were definitely like left in high school. But the reason I'm sharing all of this today is because my book that I have is called Youth Group. And this is a young adult graphic novel by two authors, Bowen McCurdy and Jordan Morris. So I was drawn to this book because of the title, obviously, but it's also a book about like a youth group who slays demons. It's like very much steeped in like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer vibe. It's placed in the 90s. And so as I started reading more about it, I was like, oh, I have to read this book. As like a former youth group kid and a big Buffy fan, this book sounds like it'll be a hoot and a half for me. So this book starts with our main character, Kay. Kay is a little bit like me when I was a teenager. Her parents kind of encourage her, try to make her go to this group. She reluctantly agrees to attend the high school youth group at her mom's church to appease her mom, who's pretty actively involved at the church. Her parents had recently gone through this pretty difficult divorce. She's not really talking to her dad. She doesn't really have a good relationship with her dad. And so in order to make sure she doesn't lose her relationship with her mom, in order to kind of support her mom and feel connected to her mom, she very reluctantly agrees, okay, I will give this youth group a shot just for you, just to make you happy, which I kind of relate to as a teenager. I really wasn't drawn into the youth group, but I kind of did it because it would make the people in my life happy. So I really related to Kay at the beginning of this book. And if Kay does attend youth group, she has this deal with her mom where her mom will let her apply for universities in New York, and she can finally escape her tiny suburban California town. So if you're familiar with Buffy, think Sunnydale. This book pretty much takes place in Sunnydale. So Kay goes to her first youth group meeting, her first session, and despite the fact that the music is very corny, they do these kind of Weird Al Yankovic Christian songs where they take popular songs and make them about Jesus. So that was pretty funny. I did enjoy that. So despite the fact that the music is corny, in her first meeting, they have this discussion about teen temptation and how to avoid it by making a spreadsheet. It's quite silly. Despite all of this that's going on, she doesn't really mind it. She finds one of the leaders, Meg. She finds Meg kind of nice, kind of easy to talk to. And despite the fact that Kay remains skeptical of the youth group and of the church in general, she finds that Meg is extremely open-minded and very, very accepting and totally understanding of the fact that Kay is not immediately feeling drawn to Jesus. And so the two form a pretty quick bond, given that Meg is so kind, so understanding, and so welcoming of Kay despite Kay's reluctancies about the youth. So kind of how her first session goes. Later that evening, Kay is hanging out in the woods with a friend of hers, and she notices something kind of suspicious going on in a cabin nearby. So she goes over to inspect, and inside the cabin are Meg, the other youth leader, a guy named Cortland, and the pastor, Doug, performing what appears to be an exorcism on a demon possessing the body of one of Cortland's roommates. So Kay is pretty obviously mortified by this, but she still watches the exorcism through the cabin window, just with morbid curiosity, until suddenly the demon charges towards her and the window shatters, knocking Kay unconscious, leaving Meg, Cortland, and Pastor Doug panicking as to what to do with her. Kay wakes up tied up in the cabin. It's never quite explained why she's tied up, because a few scenes later, she's suddenly not tied up, so I don't fully understand. But Kay wakes up tied up to a chair, and Meg and Cortland explained that she caught them trying to exorcise a lesser demon, or a demon that doesn't have its own body, and so it requires a human host in order to do its demonic stuff. The demon has now escaped. It's because it's possessing Cortland's roommate. It's gone back to their house to kind of recharge after getting injured in the fight. And the group brings Kay along to locate it and to finally exorcise the demon. And during this battle that takes place at Cortland's house, Kay learns that she, unlike most humans, because the demons possess humans in order to host them, so unlike most other humans, she is immune to demonic possession, but she can actually possess demons. So instead of them being able to possess her, she's the one that can enter the demon's body and then, fight with her cool demon powers. So that's pretty awesome. She's got her own kind of latent demon fighting powers that she's able to harness, that she's able to manifest. And there are only very few other blights like her. So they're kind of a rare breed, a rare type of demon fighter. So after this battle and after these kind of revelations that she's got her own connection to the demons, Kay is obviously pretty rattled. She doesn't know what happened. She definitely doesn't know if she wants to keep fighting demons, as Meg and Cortland are trying to encourage her to do. And she ends up going to her father's house. Since he wasn't returning her phone calls, she hasn't really been able to get in touch with him. And upon arriving at his house, Kay finds that her father has gone missing. And she finds the word blight written on his wall in blood, and is convinced that whoever came after her father is surely after her next. So, against Kay's better judgment, and despite her desire to stay away from wacky church people, she returns to the youth group to ask Meg and Cortland to train her in the art of exorcising demons. So the three make a fun little demon fighting team. For the Buffy fans out there, it's very much like a Scooby Gang kind of vibe. They end up teaming up with other church congregations who are also doing their own versions of demon fighting, as well as groups of secular demon hunting people like Wiccans and Satanists, all these different kind of demon hunting groups. They talk to the Catholics. There's all these fun different groups going on. But they end up kind of teaming up with all of these other people to track down a group of powerful demons who are out there hunting blights. So these demons are using the blood of blights in order to gain corporeal bodies. So there's a bit of this kind of dangerous group lurking in the background of the story. But what really shone for me in the story, what I thought was really one of the things that was excellently done was the relationships that the characters had with one another and the kind of fun, like Southern California 90s atmosphere. You could definitely tell that this is like a love letter to Buffy written by former youth group kids, just like me. So I really, really connected with it. I had so much fun with this book. The art is also really nice. It kind of reminded me of like Faith Erin Hicks or Molly Ostertag. It's got these like fun, bright colors. This blonde character is Meg, and she very much is supposed to be Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She like wears all the same 90s outfits that Buffy does. She's very fashionable. She has her like funny little puns, but they're all Jesus puns. But it was super fun. The book is steeped in this like 90s nostalgia, mostly through the fashion. Obviously, we've got our cheerful demon slaying blonde. We've got that kind of suburban Southern California setting. General 90s vibe of the whole story was really fun to read. I personally connected with this book a lot because I think I was a former youth group kid. Something that gave me a little chuckle at the beginning is the youth group is called The Underground, which is exactly what my youth group was called. So at the very beginning of the book, I was like, oh my God. So that was super fun. And I really related to Kay. I related to this like her choosing to attend this group willingly despite not having a connection with the faith. Because when I think back to my own youth group days, it's like, why did I do that? If I never really believed in it, if it never really felt like it was for me, why did I keep going? And yet I did, because I enjoyed it and I enjoyed like the community aspect of it. So the fact that Kay, like throughout the whole book, she never really builds a connection with faith, with religion, despite the fact that that kind of stayed consistent for her throughout the whole story, she still like made friends with these Jesus kids. She made friends with these kids that were kind of hardcore Christians. And I related to that. I thought that was like a very real experience that I personally went through. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I liked her relationship with Meg. I liked how, despite the fact that Meg was a very firm follower of Jesus, she never forced Kay to engage with those parts of the group. She never really forced it upon her. And the two of them were able to build a very lovely friendship with one another, a very supportive friendship with one another. My only regret is that it wasn't made gay, because I think they had a lot of really good chemistry and as far as that goes. But I really liked that Meg kind of let Kay participate in the youth group in the ways that she chose, which I really appreciated given my own background with youth group. I also really liked the character chemistry, not just between Kay and Meg, but also with the other characters as well. Cortland is the other kind of youth leader, demon fighter guy, and I really liked him as well. He kind of has this like stoner vibe. He like kind of casually references like all the drugs that he used to experiment with, and he joined the church to like turn his life around. But he's very chill. He's just like kind of easygoing. He likes to play music. He gets sucked into the world of demon hunting, but that's just kind of the vibe for him. And he ends up being kind of the leader of this kind of motion to build relationships with other demon hunting groups. He's the one that'll casually mention like, oh, the Wiccans are super cool, and I really like what the Satanists are getting up to. He's kind of the guy that's more willing to like put feelers out there and see if they want to team up with these other demon hunting groups, which was cool because that provided all of these other perspectives into the world of demon hunting, not just like the Christian perspective that our characters are coming from. The book had nice representation as far as different races, different ethnicities. There was some wholesome and very subtle LGBTQ rep that I'm not going to go into too much detail because that would be a spoiler. And that was something that my youth group was noticeably lacking. So I really enjoyed the addition of having like LGBTQ Christian characters in this book. So overall, it was a very sweet standalone graphic novel. The ending was kind of open-ended, so it kind of leaves the potential for sequels, but I'm not sure if any sequels are planned as of yet. But yeah, if you're like me, if you enjoy a good demon hunting story, if you're a fan of Buffy, this is very much like a love letter to Buffy. rest in peace, Michelle Trachtenberg. If you like a book with exorcisms, if you're like me and you were a former youth group kid, then I can wholeheartedly recommend Youth Group by Bowen McCurdy and Jordan Morris.
That's so fun. Thank you. Not rebooting The Vampire Slayer. Did I read that correctly?
And I think Sarah Michelle Gellar has attached her name to it already.
Oh, a reboot of Buffy? Yeah, definitely.
Fine. Or we could just leave some things in the past. All right. Well, thank you so much on joining us on this time traveling journey to 3 months ago. We hope that you enjoyed one or all of these 2024 reads. Remember that there's no expiration date on books, is that we can read and enjoy them whenever we come to them. So on behalf of myself and all of my book friends, I would like to say thank you so much for listening and happy reading in 2025.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.